Hi, hello. I want to give a short presentation on authorship. This is something I've built on with years of my experience. So I thought I would like to share with you guys. So let me get the thing set up. So this is the title of today's presentation. Basically, what is authorship? What is authorship rank? And we will talk about some other misuses. It's kind of a funny talk. Hopefully, you'll also learn something out of it. Okay. So I'm going to skip this thing. This is my academic background. So let me start with this paper. So this is a very recent paper. It came out in 2015, a couple of years back, 5 years back. And this was a retraction notice where somebody wrote a paper and somebody then retracted saying that. Now, if you look at this paper, this is a Cell Metabolism, which is a very big journal. Um, and essentially, if you carefully read this, I'll leave it to you to look at it. The retractor would basically say at this retraction statement, the lead author who is supposed to be committed fraud, everybody basically say the lead author falsified and we're going to retract it. But the lead author says, I did not falsify. Okay. And this is a very typical thing when people write papers, it's very difficult to take ownership, and the ownership is manifested when there is a problem in the paper. So keep that in the back of the mind, and then we'll come back to this theme. This is just an interesting case study. We'll talk about it later. Okay, so so there is a problem. I mean, we are seeing so many retractions, so many issues with authorship. So there is a problem. So let's kind of fundamentally take this opportunity to look at what is an author or what is an authorship in general. Okay, and that's the purpose of this presentation. So let's start with the very basic question. What is the meaning of the word author? Well, the reality is it's hard to define, since the word author was never defined in the context of publishing a journal article. That's the truth. So if I go and looked into the dictionary, it simply says an author is a person who writes something. But the problem is people employ English editors. Like when I talk to my Korean and Chinese friends, they constantly use English editors who have no technical idea, but they are not the authors of a paper. Okay, so writing alone is not authorship. Person who creates something new, right? Well, yeah, as a scientist, we are supposed to create something new, but it's not the case all the time. A lot of times we do not create anything new. We simply test some hypothesis based on the age-old ideas. Okay, so then the question is, the problem is because the first journal was actually published in 1300, which is almost 365 years later than the word author was formed. So if you look at the history of the word author, it was formed somewhere in 1300, but the first journal got published only after 300 years after that. Therefore, the word author, the English word author, is kind of a sketchy word. We really do not fully understand the meaning of it. Okay? And that's one of the problems. Okay. So what can we do? Well, I got a bunch of suggestions, and maybe we can come up with some ideas as a group or a team. Okay. So the first suggestion, we should probably abandon the word author because we don't know the real meaning, and instead use a word called contributor. So when you look at a journal paper, we should basically say, these are the authors. No, these are the contributors. That's one way to think about it. This is not my idea. This actually came by Rene, who was actually a editor of New England Journal of Medicine, and then he was also JAMA Journal editor, which is a famous medical journal. And he suggested it in 1997. Okay, and he goes on to explain, saying that by calling somebody as a contributor, or also free someone from the emotional attachment of this word author, because author, we put a lot of emotions into it. So that's a great suggestion. But then the question is, if we say contributor, are we just changing the semantics? So what is the meaning of contributor? What does it mean? Okay. Well, contributor implies that a person who has made some contribution to scientific literature. Now, traditionally, this also implies a person deserves some credit, because when you contribute something, you're supposed to get some credit. And this is where the problem comes, okay? There is a very interesting paper called Hilmer and Hilbert in 2005. They actually found agricultural economic professors who published more made more money, okay? So if you're a great author producing a lot of papers, you probably get more money. But be a little bit careful. In some programs where I work, for example, civil engineering, it could be inversely proportional. So don't rely on that. Okay. So, but in general, a contributor should get some credit, right? So then the question is, how can I get my credit? Okay. So and that's where the sticky part. Everybody wants to get credit for what they did. So or show me the money, right? Or when if I get my Nobel Prize for this paper, how much price money I should get, how much credit I should get. Okay. Now, before we think about credit, let's not run fast, not so fast. Why? Because it is not just free credit. Yes, authorship comes with credit, but it does not come with free credits. The authorship coin has got two sides. It's got a credit side, and it also got a responsibility side. So you can call authorship or contributorship or author or a contributor. Regardless that, the minute you call yourself an author, you will get some credit, and you'll also get some responsibilities. Okay. So on the thing is if you purely focus on the credit side, then the question is, how much credit should I get for authoring a multi-author paper? Okay. Well, the reality is no one knows. No one really knows how much credit you should get, but what will happen is, but everyone will own or try to get their own share. The minute the paper is published, everybody will claim success. Okay. And it also turned out the powerful usually get a big chunk of meat. So this is a beautiful picture. I like it. So here's a kill. These guys kill this as a group, right? Like a paper, and that's what I call a journal paper. And so you got professors, postdocs, grad students, everybody. But look, guess what? The professor, it's a big chunk of meat. And then comes the postdoc. He wants a big shoulder bone. And the poor graduate students is met with a meatless head portion, and he tries to drag it, okay? So unfortunately, in the credit side, everybody tries to get the piece. Now, it's kind of a good model, because what happens in the end, if the kill is big enough, everybody gets meat and everybody declares victory. And usually, if you purely focus on the credit side, sometimes everybody is happy, okay? Because the credit side, so if you look at a credit side of a standard multi-author paper, it's actually a favorite child owned by everybody, okay? Because it's a big kill. It's a big fat cow full of juicy meat. So everyone can get their chunk. And most of the time, everybody feels happy and everybody is a winner. Okay? Now, let's look at the responsibility side. The responsibility side looks at how much responsibility should an author own, right, for a given problem. Okay. Again, no one knows. So no one has to, the problem is that then no one has to own any serious responsibility. Okay. And everyone, especially the powerful professors, will run away as far as possible when there is a problem. Okay. Why? Let me explain it to you. Okay. So let's say on the responsibility side, the responsibility side actually comes to limelight when there is a problem in a paper. Okay. So if you look at a problematic paper, there is always, we throw one or two people under the bus. Of course, we can always blame the crazy, lazy graduate student, okay, who is already graduated and gone, and you blame them. Yeah, he's a lazy guy. He didn't do that. He didn't do that. I always thought he's a problem. Okay, so if we look at this model, the current model, it's a pretty damn good win-win deal, especially for powerful people as professors and senior folks, right? Because there is a lot of juicy meat to eat most of the time, so everybody feels happy. And if there is a problem, we can always dump the problem on a poor postdoc or a poor student, and nobody owns anything. Nobody has to own any responsibility. Okay, and this actually happens. Okay, this actually happens. By the way, I like this cartoon. I just want to show it to you. And here's the way Here's an interesting cartoon. I'll let you guys read. It's kind of, I thought it's a funny cartoon to see. She basically said, I'm not saying I don't want to see you again. I do sometimes in the future from a distance. And that's how we treat people, basically, when there is a problem. We just dump them and say, oh, well, he's good. I mean, yeah, he made a lot of mistake, and you just dump them, basically, okay? So let me give you a specific example for that. So there was a guy called John Darcy, and let me give you a background on that. John Darcy was actually a researcher at Harvard, and he published several papers, I think 7 or 8 papers with his mentors. And then he went to Emory University as a tenure track professor. And during his tenure review, or one of the review processes, and this happened in the 80s, they found there is a fabrication in the data. I mean, literally, the data doesn't make sense, and they said somebody fabricated this data. Okay? And then they found all kinds of reviews, and they finally found John Darcy actually made up this data. It's like taking an Excel and creating data points. Never even went to the lab. Okay, here's the data point. And they published paper in New England Journal of Medicine. It's one of the top journal, right? And with impact factor 15 or whatever. Okay. So once this is all found, basically they said, okay, we found, so John Darcy was fired. He was a medical doctor and a professor. He was fired. I don't know what happened to him after that. And then he was asked to write a retraction letter. And this is what John Darcy wrote. In his retraction letter I think this is Journal of New England Medicine. These are actual statements. I'm deeply sorry for allowing these inaccuracies and falsehoods to be published in the journal. And I apologize to the editorial board and the readers of the New England Journal, to Emory University, and to my co-authors, Dr. Nutter and Hempsville. They were at Howard. And they are impeccably honest researchers whose names appeared on these papers in good faith. Neither of them was aware of any of the inaccuracies, nor were they responsible for any of them. So remember, John Darcy published with Nutter and Hempsville several papers, I think 5 or 6 papers, okay? And so you can clearly see from this retraction, John Darcy was a graduate student or a postdoc, was thrown under the bus. And Dr. Nutter and Dr. Hempsville are completely jumped out of the bus without any blame. And they are all impeccable researchers. I'm not saying they are committed any fraud, but just read these statements carefully. They do not own any responsibility. Think about that. Just think about that for a minute. And now I'm going to write the same retraction slightly differently. And let's talk about that. Let's say this 4 papers led to a Nobel Prize. Okay, so we're looking at the other side, right? So that's the response. This is the responsibility side, right? So now let's look at the credit side. Let's assume this 4 papers led to a Nobel Prize. And then John Darcy went to CNN and gave this statement. Dr. Nutter and Hempsville are impeccably honest researchers whose names appeared on these papers in good faith. Neither of them was aware of the accuracies, nor were they responsible for any of them. Okay, think about it. If we say these data are all mine, and they are just in good faith, they're nice people, and they were not aware of any of the accuracies. These are great data, okay? These are all mine, okay? And they're not responsible for any of them. I can bet that Dr. Nutter and Hempsville would have immediately gone to the press and said, well, we told Don Darcy everything. He doesn't know anything. Okay? We supervised him. He was working in our lab. We knew everything. The whole story will be different, right? They will fight to death to get a big chunk of meat, for sure. Okay? But there is absolutely no fight here when there is a responsibility. I think that's a problem. And I see this pattern all the time, and that's the problem. Okay? So the question then is, let's go back to our discussion. We agreed that we should not think author as an author, it should be a contributor. So the second thing is, suggestion I make is, author is a person who is willing to shoulder the responsibility for the contribution he is going to make. Okay? So then the question becomes, what are the typical responsibilities associated with authorship or a contributorship? Okay. Now, Here, we can actually look at ICMJ guidelines. These are the guidelines developed by International Committee for Medical Journals, and they are very solid. It says authorship should be based on substantial contribution to conception, design, data acquisition, analysis, and interpretation, drafting the article and revising it critically, final approval of the draft to be published, and authors should meet all three conditions, not just one, all three conditions. Okay. And the guidance also states that acquisition of funding, collection of data, a general supervision of research group alone does not constitute authorship, which means just because you wrote a proposal and got money does not guarantee that you can be an author. It's more than that. It's more than that. Okay. And same thing with just because you went to the lab and collected some data does not mean you can be an author. And just because I'm a supervisor of my student does not mean I should get authorship either. Okay. So it's more than that. Okay. Now, I personally think there are a few problems with this model. So I kind of said, so here are the limitations. It is not a, first of all, it's not a quantitative method. It's a very qualitative method, and it ignores the realities of funding, which is very difficult, and marginalizes powerful PIs who control resources, basically, right? So that's the reality. People, powerful professors and PIs control the money. So if you're not going to recognize them, they won't give you the money. If there is no money, I can't hire a graduate student, and that means there is no research. So somehow money should play a role. And it also provides no guidance for co-author rank. How do you rank people? What is the second author? What is the third author? It doesn't say anything about it. So we need a little more fundamental approach, okay? And so here are some suggestions. So before I can give you a suggestion, let's reflect on a classic question. Let's say here's a picture of Moses, right? He comes out of the mountain, Mount Sinai, with this great 10 commandments. And so we could ask a very classic question, who is the author of 10 commandments? And you might tell me that that's a trivial question. Why are you asking me? Well, it's not. If you really think about it, it's not, okay? So how do we get this answer to this question? Well, we can look at Bible, and if we go to the Bible and look at it, Exodus 34:1 says, the Lord said to Moses, chisel out of 2 stones tablets like the first ones, and I, the Lord, will write the 10 commandments. The same chapter, verses 28 says, Moses was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights without eating bread or drinking water, and he, which is Moses, wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, the 10 commandments. Okay, so you could see kind of two versions. Okay, who wrote it? It's really not clear. However, we know Moses, just like a graduate student, did a lot of work. He chiseled the stone tablets himself. He carried them. He waited for 40 days without eating and drinking, and possibly did some writing too. Okay, and he was in the mountains, just like our students in the lab. But it's very clear God played a big role in this thing, right? And if we want to give an authorship, we would probably give everything to God and maybe the secondary authorship to Moses. But it's not very clear. So if even a classic document like this, it's very difficult to decide on authorship. So the one way to think about it is, when you have problem, you divide and conquer. That's what we do as scientists, right? We have a complicated water, we divide the water into different components, okay? What are the main components? And then we can mix and match and find carbonate species and other species and find the composition of a water. Or if you have a complicated force, we resolve them into components, X velocity, Y velocity, X force, Y force, and then we solve the problem. Similarly, I think my suggestion 3 is every manuscript can be divided into 4 basic elements or components. Okay, so these are like base vectors. Okay, in a 3-dimensional space, we got 3 basis vectors, I, J, K, and we can resolve all forces in 3 different components. Similarly, a paper is basically a vector in a 4-dimensional space, and the elementary vector, the basic components are ideas, work, writing, and stewardship. And every paper needs them. Okay, so, and every paper can be resolved in terms of these 4 basic components. And that's my hypothesis. Okay, that's how I feel we should be viewing a paper, a manuscript. Okay, now so I kind of proposed a kind of a revision to this guideline, which is kind of my own suggestion, and this is actually published. So a contributor or co-contributor is a person who contributed to the component one, which is ideas, and, 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 and contributed to work, actually doing the work, contributed to writing, and, and also responsible for developing resources and guaranteeing the overall integrity of the entire work before and after publication. That's what stewardship is. Okay, so those are the four major components, and I hypothesize you should contribute at least three of the four components. Okay, so let's think about a case. If you're a lab director, and of course you are the stewardship, and you probably won't have time to actually get into the lab and measure things, but you should do other things. You should provide ideas, you should provide writing, and you do the mentorship, which is stewardship, right? And if you're a graduate student, well, you don't control the money, you don't control the lab, so you don't get anything for stewardship, but then you can contribute to the ideas, you can contribute to the work, and you can contribute to the writing, okay? And if you're a co-collaborator, if you're a co-PR, okay, if you're a colleague collaborating, right? Again, you may put some resources in and get some credit for stewardship, or you can help with writing, and you can help with ideas, okay? Or maybe you can help getting some data. So somehow you need to play a role in at least three major components, okay? Now, so this is again a qualitative approach. It doesn't put numbers to it. It's as an engineer and a scientist, I always like to put numbers, and this does not put numbers. So how can we quantify contributions and the associated responsibility level to each of the co-authors? Okay, so my next attempt is to do that. Okay, in order to do that, my fifth suggestion is I propose what we call a three-step approach, where we can quantify this thing using a matrix model. Okay, and here's the heart of this model. Before you do anything, the step one is to construct what we call a basic element matrix. Okay, so here's a case study. This was actual case study. Okay, this was an oil spill paper we wrote a long time back. In fact, this is what the paper which made me think about all this problem. What we do is you take a paper and you think in terms of these four basic components. Okay, so this particular paper we as a group decided ideas contribute about 20%, work contribute about 30%, and writing contributes about 35%, and stewardship is 15%. And if I add everything, it should be 1. So there has to be a mass balance, right? So a paper consists of four components in this case, and we divide them into 0.2, 0.3, 0.35, 0.15. Now, these numbers are not set in stone, but trust me, these are pretty good numbers. And you can sit in any group and talk about it. You will come numbers very close to it on typical papers. I'm not talking about, I'm talking about water resources research type papers, standard journal papers which we write, or ESNT, things like that. But if you're writing a half-a-page science article with some great idea like a DNA structure or something, that's a different. There probably idea will play a big role, or some work might play a significant role. I don't know that, okay? And writing might play a smaller role. But in most cases, for standard papers, writing plays a significant role because I have so many pieces sitting on my table. Nobody took the time to write a paper. And there's a data, there is work, there is idea, but it's useless. It's sitting on my table actually still, okay? So, but you have to decide that. Once you have that, then you could actually ask basically to people to provide how much they contributed. So I actually put this in terms of fraction. You can put it in percentage if you want. Then you can say, okay, each of the people who collaborated in this work, tell me how much you worked on. So here's, in this particular case study, I asked one of my postdocs and requested, hey, can you tell me how much credit you should get for this paper, okay? And she basically came back and said, oh my God, this is a very first paper we are writing in our group. I really worked hard. I need about 60, 70%, okay? So I'm calling her Jenny. And then I said, okay, wait a minute. Can you just itemize this? Can you tell me what percentage you contributed to ideas, what percentage you contributed to work, what percentage you contributed to writing, what percentage you would say stewardship? And she actually went back and did that homework and said, okay, send me an email, and this is the number I got. Okay, she said, I contributed to 40%, contributed to work to 60%, say 70% for stewardship. Then what I do is I take this and multiply by this number. So 40 times 0.2, 60 times 0.3, 70 times 0.35, 20 times 0.15, I get this number. So the net contribution is 54. Okay? Now, notice when I asked her to tell me how much credit you want, she said 60 to 70% actually. The minute I asked her to itemize, it already dropped to 54%, okay, because she cannot realistically defend 70%. Now, what she doesn't know is I also had two PhD students working on this project, a master's student and a colleague. I asked others to do the same thing. Okay, give me some percentage, and they all did that. And this is the matrix we got. Okay, so this is the matrix we got. Okay. So Johnson, a graduate student, said, I need 30%. I did all the work. I was in the field working hard. I need 80%. I did most of the writing. Remember, I put Jenny's number. So the technician said, well, I started the instrument. I need everything. And I didn't do much writing, but I need some credit too, blah, blah. He got that. And my co-PI, who's a colleague of mine, and he said, well, I didn't do the work, but it's all my ideas. And I knew I'm a great writer, so I did a lot of contribution. And I'm the program manager for this problem, and I need that. So he got that. So the problem is now I can do a mass balance, right? I'm an engineer, right? So we take all the credit and add them. Okay. Guess what? We got one paper, but we have 153% that cannot. We are violating the mass balance. Okay. So this particular meeting, what I did was I pulled all these people in and said, folks, we have a problem. Like Houston, we have a problem, right? So we have one paper but we're pretending as if it's 1.3 paper, and nowhere we are closing on mass balance. But don't worry. There is one guy, which is me, who was a PA of the particular project. He's a lazy guy. So in order to get the mass balance correct, I will just give myself a minus 53%, and then we will satisfy the mass balance. Okay. You guys should really see what happened in this group meeting. They all felt ashamed. Okay, they know, because they know I was in the lab, I was in the field, I wrote the proposal, right? So everybody acknowledged, oh my God, you did so much work. This is unfair. This is not a good idea. We need to redistribute. So clearly, putting a matrix together, this is not a solution for all. It's not a punish. It's not going to solve all the problems, but it will make us think as a group. If we did that, then we sat and thought as a group, and this is what we got. Okay, then we said, okay, wait a minute. Yeah, you did a lot of, I asked Jenny, yeah, you did a lot of work, but who did the analysis? Well, it's a graduate student. Okay, so he should get more credit. Okay, and then I challenged people. Yeah, you gave some ideas, but guess what? The project was started by me. I mean, you guys not even employed. I took you as a graduate student and a postdoc later. Okay. So every single meeting was under my supervision. So I should get something, right? So we kind of redistributed everything, and we kind of came up with this matrix. And now the key is we got to close on mass balance on ideas, mass balance on work, mass balance on writing, and mass balance on stewardship. Okay. Now I also have a guideline that stewardship should be the least of all these three. And usually in my group, writing is the maximum. Not ideas, not work. Writing is the maximum, and stewardship is the least. And then we kind of, so this can vary from paper to paper a little bit, not much. Okay. So once you have these numbers, then you can round these numbers, and this will allow us to put people on different positions, and we can assign authorship and rank them based on these numbers. Okay. Now, typically what I do is I usually put a summary statement in my acknowledgement section that Fong developed the model equations, Clement did the field work, Fong and John did the experimental plan, and Fong conducted the experiments, and we all jointly wrote the manuscripts. And then we would actually round up all those numbers and put actual contribution here. The overall, the responsibility levels by each people own, basically, we view this as a responsibility, right? I'm 15% responsible for ideas, 0% for work, 5% for writing, okay, 30% for stewardship. So the responsibility we take is this much. So this is a net responsibility, okay? And this will reveal exactly where we contributed. This table will reveal that, right? So this is a good way to resolve authorship contribution. And also, if there is in the future, if there is a problem, well, if the idea is bad, then we know whom to assign responsibility to. If the writing is bad, we know who should respond the responsibility. The work is bad, we would know whom to assign the work responsibility to, right? So the paradigm shift I'm doing is, when you look at the authorship, there is a credit side and the responsibility side. And I really want to say, don't worry about this credit. The focus on how much credit one should get, it's not a useful thing. You always should focus on the responsibility approach. And in fact, perhaps ask a controversial question and assume every paper, usually we think when we publish a paper, oh my God, it's going to become a Nobel Prize or it's going to get an award. That's the credit approach, right? So in the responsibility approach, you always think, oh my God, this paper is useless. We're going to present. And then ask the question, how much penalty you are willing to take, okay? And in fact, I always say, well, let's assume we're going to go to prison for 100 days. How many days you want to sit in prison? Well, if somebody comes and boldly says, hey, you know what? I did this data. If you think it's wrong, I will go to the prison for 50 days. Well, you know what? There comes the leader. There comes the leader who wants to own the responsibility, and he should be the lead author. There you go. Okay. So a characteristic of a co-author is he's a contributor to start with, who owns certain responsibility. And he's willing to stand by this effort and take the blame for potential flaws in ideas, potential flaws in work, potential flaws in data, and potential flaws in writing. Okay. So he's willing to taste. So he should be able to boldly say, the faults are mine. I'm willing to take the response. And that's what an author is. And that's what a true contributor is. And that's the person automatically gets a credit for the responsibility they own in that particular work, right? So let me summarize this thing. In summary, I view a journal article as like a sculpture. Okay, so let's think about it. So here's a sculpture of Moses, which was chiseled by Michelangelo. So remember that nobody has seen Moses actually. Okay, and so how did this and this particular rock was not looking like Moses. It was a rock, right? So this is a sculpture which is an outcome of Michelangelo's own dreams and imagination. This guy dreamed about it. I'm going to take this rock, convert it into a sculpture, right? And in the end, it's Michelangelo's property, something he worked on it and made concerted effort to produce this flawless, near perfect art. The title sculptor was given to Michelangelo because he imagined the art, worked hard, and shouldered the responsibility for creating this particular product. Okay? And that's what the meaning of an author, right? Really. Okay. So this is what authorship is all about, and this is beautifully summarized in a paper written by Hughes in 1982, and it's a note published in Mayo Clinic publication. He was the head of the publication division of Mayo Clinic, and he puts it beautifully. Okay, and this is what he says: who's an author? Authors are just like sculptors. To a responsible writer of an article with his name on it is the highest product of his mind and art, his property, as nearly flawless as he can make it. Founded in his character and evidence of it, authorship cannot be conferred. It may be undertaken by someone who is willing to shoulder the responsibility that goes with it. That's the bottom line, folks. If you are not willing to, this is a beautiful statement, okay? We can nitpick everything, but in the end, when you write a paper, everyone should read this statement and say, was I part of this effort? Was I part of this journey? Okay. So in the end, let me summarize. So who should be a co-author? A person who is part of a long intellectual journey to produce a near perfect product of his or her own mind. A person who can shoulder some unique responsibilities and defend the ideas and data in that particular work. Okay. And so if you can do that, if you can call yourself, I can do it, then you should be an author. If not, you should definitely rethink about it. Okay. So with that, I always say this is a work I did just for fun. Okay. So it was not a funded work. So you can always send me a dollar to me. You can mail it to me, or if you see me in a conference or somewhere, you can donate a dollar to me. Uh, so uh, so here are a couple of papers I wrote. One is an ESNT paper, which is a viewpoint article, editorial type paper. So you can see that. And I also wrote a full paper on what is this authorship and summarize all these authorship matrix ideas. Again, you can get it from my website, or you can basically download and search this thing, and it's an open domain paper, so you can download. Okay, so thank you for your time, and if you have any comments, feel free to email me. I hope you learned something out of it, and finally, I really want to encourage all of us to be responsible authors. Thank you.